Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire's Business of America podcast with your host, Jerry Rogers.
Welcome to another episode of the Business of America. We talk with the advocates, the doers, the innovators, the owners of mom and pop shops, those who are making a difference in the arena. And recently at Real Clear Policy, I came across an interesting op-ed on pension reform. Yes, I find pension reform and economics and such things to be interesting. And the author was someone who our audience should know from Based Politics. She's the president and co-founder of Based Again, one of the places, these venues where they say this, but they actually do this. They teach you or encourage you to think about issues, not what to think about the issues. But our guest, Hannah Cox, is a writer, a commentator. She's an activist, and she knows her stuff. So, Hannah, welcome to the Business of America.
Good to be here, Jerry. Thank you for that kind introduction.
Oh, it's true. And I love Based Politics. My side job, well, maybe this is the side job. I'm not sure. But I am the editor at Real Clear Policy. I'm the editor at Real Clear Health. I've been at Real Clear for a long time. And I love Based Politics. I really, really do. And I know that you, in the past, you've been associated with, maybe you still are, with FEE, the Foundation for Economic Education. Yes. And I love FEE. I love the libertarian thought leaders, Reason, AIER. I used to work at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, Fred Smith and that gang, because our politics and our activism and our business isn't just left-right. There really is a broader public discussion, I think, that this town misses often, which is why I found your piece so interesting. Why don't you, again, set it up? It's Alaska. They're talking about pension reform, or you're talking about pension reform. They're talking about bringing back kind of the old ways of public pensions. But tell us about it.
Yeah, and let me expand upon this quickly, because I know people at first brush might say, it's Alaska, why do I care? It doesn't impact me. And the reason that this caught my interest is because, yes, it is a battlefront happening in Alaska as we speak, but it actually is a larger trend that I'm catching wind of across multiple states. And what's most troubling about it is it tends to be red states that are driving the agenda right now. So this is why I think Alaska is really interesting. And it turns out pensions are a little bit more interesting than most people probably think. I think for myself, I'm a millennial. I've never had a pension. The concept of having a pension is 50 years behind me. It's never been something that could be a reality. I have a 401k like most Americans, or some kind of similar structure. But essentially, many states have in recent decades turned away from their pension systems that they had structured to provide retirements for government workers. And they did that for one reason and one reason alone, which is that they were going bust. They could not afford to fund them. The way that pensions work is quite different as a whole. I mean, there's different types of structures and systems, but most of the time you work for a given place, a given institution for a number of decades. You make a salary during that time period. They take the highest salary that you earn, and then they pay you based on a multiplier of that salary for the rest of your life once you retire. So as life expectancy has increased and as the number of people working in government has grown significantly, they have not always been able to uphold those promises. And when it comes to pensions, they have to pay it whether they have the money or not. And so it's ended up with states having at times billions in unfunded obligations where they're having to continue paying people who are retired at really high rates and amounts that a lot of the times these people did not pay into to receive, while they're also struggling to just pay basic salary for people who are still working. And so in states like Alaska, they actually turned away from this system 15 years ago, and they implemented defined contribution plans, 401ks for people in government. And so that's been working very, very well. People in government have a good retirement. It's now structured probably like what you have or I have, where they pay a certain percentage in, they get matches for that. It goes into a market account and it grows over time. But right now there's a huge push to bring back the old pension system in Alaska, despite the fact that the current system's working pretty good.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you about that because I agree with you. In fact, look, my father retired from the New York City Transit Authority, and he has a traditional public pension. And I remember when I was a kid, graduating from university, from college, and he was like, "Hey, kid, you should work for the TA, or you should work for become a firefighter or a police officer." And it was because of his idea of the pension. He's of that generation where you work for the same place for 40 years and you have your pension. But life isn't that way. I mean, my goodness, since I'm out of school, since my 20s, I've had numerous jobs, myriad career changes. I've never been at one place more than 5 or 6 years. And so the model doesn't work. So why does any state want to bring it back?
I think it boils down mostly to politics. So I always like to look at who's pushing.
Get out of here. Politics has nothing to do with it. Come
Never.
on.
It's certainly not economics driving it. So if you start digging in, the people that are pushing hardest for this are the current public sector unions, right? The government unions. And they're the ones behind this. And get this, not only do they want to bring back a pension style system, they still owe about $8 billion on their old system, by the way, that they got rid of 15 years ago. So they're still in debt from the original one. But not only do they want to bring back the pension system, they want to make it retroactive for those past 15 years. I mean, we're talking about billions that the state simply doesn't have to do that. But of course, it's because they want cushier retirements for themselves. I think it's pretty plain and simple. And I also think, I'm kind of a union buster. I don't have much taste for them, to be quite honest, but I explicitly dislike public sector unions. In the private sector, I dislike them. I think they're, a total drudge on an economy, but they have a right to exist. In the public sector, I don't think that that's true. Public sector unions are taking our tax dollars, and then they're going in and they're using those tax dollars oftentimes to lobby against us, the taxpayers, and our interest. And that's what we see happening right here. And they have a lot of hold over politicians because they tend to be people like teachers unions or police unions that have a lot of public support. And so the lawmakers don't want to push back against them. They're scared to go up against them. Often they're making political promises to them in the first place in order to get in office, so they're beholden to them. And that's what's really driving this right now. The talking point they're using as an excuse is that we have to have this because we can't currently find enough people to hire in these government jobs, which...
Wait. In Alaska, they can't... It's Alaska.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. It'd be different for different states, but why would someone? I'm sorry, I interrupted you. But
No.
Why would I leave beautiful Washington D.C. to go to Alaska to stay in a job for 30 years?
Right. And I think that, you hit the nail on the head. First and foremost, Alaska is by no means the only state claiming to have
Right. I know that.
It's
yes.
across the country, and the libertarian in me says, good. A lot of government jobs shouldn't exist. And if they're not good jobs, then that's the market speaking. People don't want to do these jobs. And that would say to me, they either shouldn't be there or they need to have better structures. You need to offer things like remote work or flexible schedules, or you need to pay people better. I mean, those are the things that mostly people are looking for, especially in our generations. They're not going to move to a place where it's cold and dark a significant amount of the time and works more for decades just to have a pension. That's not the reality of what the marketplace looks like these days. And so they need to look at what they need to do to recruit locally. And I think those kinds of suggestions, as well as reforming, some of the requirements. Oftentimes there's needless regulations around government jobs. I know they did recently get rid of a requirement that said you had to have a college degree to do some of these things, but initiatives like that would go a lot further. They also could raise the contributions for their existing 401k system, right? If that's really an issue that they're hearing on the ground, that would be the common sense next step. Instead, they're wanting to take a sledgehammer to it. So I don't think that their talking point holds any water. I think you're exactly right in pointing out that's simply not what people are looking for, or how the workforce operates these days. I think it has more to do with the people who are currently in those positions wanting to get better, cushier deals for themselves. And to be honest, wanting to be sort of insulated from the market. When you and I invest in our 401ks, we're subject to market fluctuations within that. Oftentimes fluctuations that the government is influencing based on
that's right.
policy decisions. And yet they're arguing that people who work for government should be shielded from those consequences. I think that it's a really poor argument. And lastly, I'll add, unions are dwindling in numbers, and that's because they really aren't a good deal for the vast majority of people in or out of them. And so I think if you look at who benefits here, the unions are the ones who benefit from somebody being trapped in a job for decades and decades that they can continue to collect off of while they're in that role, in those golden handcuffs to get that pension.
Again, part of what we do on this podcast is to highlight those in the arena, Teddy Roosevelt gave his speech, the man in the arena. It's easy to criticize. It's easy to throw criticisms and roadblocks at those who are actually doing things. And so that's what we try. We try to highlight here those who are doing things. And to that point, it seems to me too that when public sector unions, when the public sector, when government interferes in the market, it also then crowds out private opportunities and innovations. When the government is promoting winners and losers, when it's picking winners and losers, cronyism and this sort of thing, there's private sector solutions, private sector opportunities that we're neglecting. Is that part of this argument where public sector unions, because let's face it, it's 20th century at best. It's certainly not 21st century. Is the money spent, the time spent, the politics spent on public sector unions and trying to revive them in some places? Isn't it just robbing the main street of private sector solutions and ideas?
Wow, I love that point. Yes, I think absolutely that's correct. And when you think about what the baseline function of a union is, it's to reduce competition, right? For those who are within it. They don't want competition. They only succeed at getting higher wages and benefits for the people in them by stripping everybody else outside of them of those wages. So the costs get pushed on to everybody else. I think that is a huge problem as somebody who believes in a limited government on a principled level. When you look at the things that are unionized, right? When you look at teaching, when you look at public transportation, when you look at policing, these are industries that have largely stagnated. They are in the decline. The outcomes that we're receiving for them are getting worse and worse. We're not seeing the technological innovation you would expect to see in these sectors. We're seeing, when it comes to schools, we're seeing worse scores for kids. We're seeing Americans actually lose IQ points. I mean, we are going down in IQ points in this country. When it comes to police, the amount of crimes that they solve is in the gutter. I mean, it's less than 60% of homicides every year. And that's at the FBI level. It gets worse as you trickle on down. And that's just for homicides. I mean, they don't even solve things like rapes or property crimes anymore. So I really do think that we should be starting to have these questions. I mean, look around the transportation industry recently with the issues we're having with Boeing planes and airplanes ripping out in the middle of the air and losing wheels. I mean, I think all of this is indicative of a government operation that has been shielded from competition. And I think that is one of many issues with public sector unions, is not only the taxpayer-funded lobbying that they use to go against us, but it is actually shielding these environments and institutions from innovation and competition from the market. And so there's so many great things on the table. I'm a huge proponent of school choice. That's something that's going across the country like dominoes right now.
Right.
I think that there's similar proposals for how we could deal with policing, how we could implement actual market incentives into policing. But as long as the unions have the power, they are going to stand in opposition to any of that. And so I love that you called out this layer of the problems with them, because I think it's something that goes kind of under the radar, but it's a huge stagnation in our country. And I think that many of these things don't need to be done by the government whatsoever. And if you can't get people to come work for the government to do them, then probably it is time to hand them off. But instead, what we see is the government's growing like wildfire, right? It's one of the only reasons they're able to claim the economic growth they've been trying to claim under Biden, is that they keep adding all these jobs. But when you dig into the numbers, it's mostly government jobs. It's like over 600,000 government jobs were added in 11 months last year alone.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because it's not just the government interference into the market. And again, for even when we talk about the market, it really is to a certain extent, it interferes in working class people's lives. We're not just talking about Wall Streeters, but mom and pop shops who are, again, crowded out. Again, you mentioned teachers unions, and teachers unions were the one of, I want to say number one. Yeah, I'll exaggerate to make a point. Number one pushers to close down our schools during COVID. Even when we knew that children and schools weren't vectors of the spread of the disease, even when we knew that COVID wasn't a virus of the very young, but rather it was a virus for the very old. And even still, they leveraged it. They wanted more money. They leveraged a pandemic in order to push their political power. And they also stifled conversations. They also were part of the whole censorship regime where you couldn't ask that question about this, about a booster, or you couldn't ask a question on social media about a medicine or a treatment for COVID. And it was, to a large extent, the teacher unions, especially in states like Maryland and blue states, New York, they had a heavy say with politicians on what we could say. And so again, this isn't even a right or left thing. This is we want right information. We want to be able to have these discussions and arguments. We want to think, not be told what to think. And I think again, this is, I'm not sure if it's tangential. I think this kind of ethos, this public sector ethos, stifles innovation, but also stifles all kinds of speech and exchange of ideas. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you touched on something that's really important here, which is the reason that we see so many of the red states kind of jumping on this pension bandwagon, I think is really due to a lot of the populism undercurrents that are cutting through society right now. And it's interesting, when I've talked about this on my own social media platforms thus far, there is a general outrage in the public about the state of their wages, about their ability to save for retirement, about the realities of whether or not Social Security will be there when they do get to retirement age, if we have to raise the age limits. That's been the huge conversation on TikTok for the past 2 weeks, because Nikki Haley accidentally told the truth in a debate and said, yeah, the age limits will have to be raised, and people are losing their minds. And so when you bring up this pension issue, a lot of people aren't separating that from their own situations versus government. And they're saying, it used to be that we only had to work this many years and then we were guaranteed this and we want it to be that way again. And so I think politicians on the right are tamping into that. And that's why they're starting to float the idea of pensions. But in reality, this is an anti-populist agenda. This is something that benefits people in government who already have much cozier positions than the average American. They have much more long-term assuredness in their role, first and foremost. They often are paid better than people in the private sector, and they do often get better retirements than people. And so I think that it's interesting how there's been kind of a sleight of hand around this to convince people that this is like something that would in some way benefit them or bring back their own pensions. And the reality is pensions aren't coming back, and that there's reasons for that, right? Again, it's the growth of government, it's the devaluation of the currency, it's the interest rates. There's all kinds of problems and for reasons why we can't have that world anymore. But there's also sort of a rose-colored outlook on what things used to be, right? I've seen all over TikTok people saying, well, now they're just going to raise the age for Social Security because lifespans have gotten longer, and this is the whole scam. When in reality, when Social Security was put in place, there were only about 7.8 million people age 65 or older in the country, and the average age was around 59 to 63 for men versus women. So the plan was always that the vast majority of people would not be able to access Social Security, or if they did, they wouldn't access it for very long. You compare that now to a situation where you have, I think, almost 60 million people in the country over age 65. It's something like 1 in 6 Americans are 65 or older, and the life expectancy is 76, 77. The math isn't mathing. And it's not that there's something being done to the people. It's just that as a whole, things have gotten better, but you need to plan for your own future. You need to, deal with the reality of what the current situation is. And instead, they really want to go backwards. So I think as a whole, politicians are really are using that to their own gain. And people are getting played in this scenario because, even in places like Alaska, where people don't really pay taxes, it's a very different situation. You don't pay income or sales taxes in Alaska like you do in many places.
Well, that's the reason to go to Alaska.
Yeah, that actually is the reason you might want to move there. But that being said, they mostly collect their taxes off of the oil and gas companies, but it is still a scarcity question. There is still a pool of money. And when you're looking at things like this as an individual person, you have to recognize that if you spend this pool of money over here, you don't have that pool of money to spend over here. And so if you want, certain things in society, like better roads, better schools, if you want to actually have the number of police you need to deal with crime, then you can't afford pensions. And we've seen this recently. I saw an example I quoted in my article with you guys in Chicago, where a substantial portion of their budget is now going to police pensions. It almost dwarfs what they pay for payroll. And because of that, they aren't going to be able to keep hiring more police, which is what they need to do to actually combat crime. And so there are always repercussions. Bastiat said this in the law, but there's always unseen consequences for every public policy decision. And that's one thing at Base Politics we're so passionate about, in teaching people how to think versus versus what to think is something might sound good and favorable and like for the people on its face, but when you really start peeling back the layers and looking at the reality of it, that's not really what's happening here.
No. Look, nationally, our government will spend $1 trillion just on the interest on the debt, which is more than the nation spends on national defense. So to your point, state governments, local governments, national governments, these are decisions that will have real impact. So like, for instance, Governor Wes Moore from Maryland, he's been in the news lately. The Ravens were in the championship game, and he's a young Democrat progressive. And he recently proposed a $63 billion budget, and the state of Maryland will go into deficit, structural deficits, $3 and $4 billion in 2 or 3 or 4 years out. And this could be any governor, but there's no, we need to cut this or spend differently here or be more creative. The state of Maryland, I mentioned Maryland only because they're going to spend between $4 and $5 billion on the failed public schools in the state. And even though we now that Maryland has a structural deficit, no one's going back and saying, maybe we should look at this public school plan, which, by the way, is just a spending plan. There's nothing in it about curricula, nothing in it about teacher training or certification, or maybe opening up the teacher profession to those, hey, if you have a master's degree in algebra or math, maybe you can teach without the state license. There's no kind of reform talk. But to your point, I want to underline it, that when governments and politicians make decisions, there are usually some good impact, but there's lots of unintended consequences. And what's going to happen with Alaska? What's going to happen with the states? Because you're right, unions, private sector unions are diminishing. I know we see in the media that they're stronger than ever. They're not. If you read, and I like Harold Meyerson very much, The American Prospect. It's I read it, but they're talking about how there's been a renaissance in private sector unions. There isn't. In fact, it's still growth is negative. What's the future of unions? What's the future of public sector unions?
Yeah, I mean, they're hanging on by a thread. It really is the public sector unions that are propping up the entire infrastructure right now. The labor force participation rates in private unions are at an all-time low. And that's largely because they can no longer force you to join them, by the way. That's thanks to things like right to try laws, which often get a bad rap, but literally just say they can't make you join them if you don't want to. And turns out when you don't force people to join them, most people don't want to because they can do a better job negotiating for themselves. I mean, unions are, I always say it, and it's a bit harsh, but I don't think it's in any way untrue. Unions are really only a good deal if you're a bad worker, right? If you don't have a lot to bring to the table, then unions are a good idea. But if you're a hard worker and you're a smart person, you're a good negotiator, you're going to get brought down to the lowest common denominator in there. So I think that when you look at public sector unions, though, they are doing significantly better than their private counterparts. And again, I think that is because of their ability to come in and use your tax dollars against you. I mean, this is just such a crazy scheme. The whole idea of taxpayer-funded lobbying is a huge problem within the government.
Is there anywhere in the states, any state, because it's funny you said this. I was just talking to a friend of mine about this very issue. Why is it that they can take my tax dollars and go to the state legislature and lobby against my interests? Mm-hmm. Is there any reform in that area anywhere that you can't take these monies and use it for political purposes?
There are a number of bills flying around to that end and have been for probably the better part of a decade now. I don't know off the top of my head if anybody has passed them, but they should. I know Texas has a bill that Briscoe Cain brought last year. I think New Hampshire just had one introduced by one of the Young Americans for Liberty lawmakers up there. So there's definitely efforts to do that. And it's not a hard thing to pass, right? Just saying, if you want to come in here like an everyday citizen in your private capacity and you happen to be a teacher, you happen to be a police officer, then that's your First Amendment right. You can go do that. But to show up here in your professional clothing as a member of the union or a member of the government and lobby for regulations that protect you and harm the American people, it ought to be banned, period. And it's not just
closing down schools to go have a lobbying day.
Yeah.
Teachers unions. I mean, and again, in many states, I mean, and you can comment on this, in many states, the strongest, the most powerful special interest groups, right? These are special interest groups, are teachers' unions and public sector unions, the most powerful special interest in states.
Absolutely. The teachers' unions are so dominant, and they give 90% plus of their income to Democratic politicians. So they have them by the throat. But for some reason, Republicans kowtow to them all the time, too. I mean, and they have been doing a big expenditure in red southern states in recent years to try to stop school choice. They are the only lobbying body that you will see showing up at state capitals to block school choice. And they're there working against poor and middle income families who are desperate for their kid to have a better future. And it's actually just really disgusting and gross to watch. And I'll say the same thing for police unions. You know, police unions have a similar stranglehold on the right as the teachers unions do on the left, and they protect bad cops. They prevent the people from having accountability, from accessing body camera footage, from being sure bad cops can get sued if they hurt people on the job. They do all these things that actually not only make the public less safe, but they actually hurt good cops, right? They ensure that the whole barrel continues to rotting the good apples right along with it. And so both of those types of unions are really big problems, and they spend a ton of time, and not only just the money, but the time that they end up showing up at lawmakers' offices and at hearings and putting pressure on them. It is significant. I have been in these committees, I've been in these capitals, and I can't tell you the pressure these two groups are able to exercise over people who are supposed to be representing us. And I think that is such a huge flaw. If we have a representative government and my lawmaker is supposed to represent me, but I'm capped at giving them like $2,500, whatever it is, and these unions can come in and flood their PACs with millions of dollars. Do I have representation? I don't think I do. So I think that that's something Americans really need to pay closer attention to. And to be fair, it's not just unions, right? It's also like your commerce board, you know, all of these different bureaucracies and regulatory agencies in the states and federal level. Those people are also using your tax dollars to come in and lobby against you. And it's never in your favor. It's always against capitalism. It's always against accountability within government. And it really needs some serious attention.
Transparency and accountability, it seems those two values are something that most politicians don't want anything to do with. I think there is some good news. We just had a show with an AFP director in South Carolina, and we talked about certificate of need and how in South Carolina, both the left and the right, Democrats and Republicans, passed out of the legislature unanimously a healthcare reform to allow more competition in hospitals and provider groups. And my point in saying that is that it seems to me, because you just mentioned that the right does seem to placate to the police unions and fire unions, the left to teachers unions. So therefore, there ought to be then the kind of a mechanism for it's not bipartisan, nonpartisan, but almost like a third way, or for folks who are neither left nor right, or folks who can put aside their partisanship. Both Democrats and Republicans push for reform. I'm a despairing optimist. Fred Smith from CEI, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, used to have a newsletter called The Despairing Optimist. And I got it. Like, I have hope for the future, but I'm also concerned. Gauge for us, is there hope? Will we see public sector union reform? Will we see some kind of third way voices and see some compromises and some good legislation and promoting more economic liberty, promoting more choice for citizens? Yeah,
I think the good news is I'm one of those middle grounders. I don't consider myself left or right. I often say I'm a pissed off happy warrior. I'm kind of in the same camp for I'm
despairing. You're angry. I'm despairing.
I'm like happy because I think we will win, but I'm mad at all the injustice and everything happening underneath the surface that I see. But I, in my very short career in politics, have already had so many wins, and I've gotten all of them based on this kind of path, right? Of finding these issues that I absolutely think both left and right people can and should come together on. The problem is that in most of the mainstream media, the things that get elevated are these extreme partisan issues where there's just so much divide and there is no reckoning on it. But most of that's federal, and that's not the case on most issues, and it's not where most Americans are. I mean, only 25% of Americans are even consider themselves hardline left or right. The vast majority are over here in this middle. And I think when you talk about things like certificate of need, I love that you brought that up. I actually worked with Candace in the state on that, and that was a huge win to get, a very tough win to get, but they got it. I think it comes down to awareness, making people aware that these kinds of things are on the books to begin with. Certificate of need, when you tell people it exists, they don't believe you. They're like, there has to be.
What do you mean a hospital can't come in and what do you mean doctors can't come in and serve the community? Come on, Jerry, you're full of it.
Yeah, they're like that. There has to be a catch. No, that's exactly what's happening. Is the hospitals get to come in and lobby against competition, and they get it for the most part. So getting that kind of win when you're up against a lot of special interests and a lot of money on the other side, and all we have to come in is our values and the public, the public outrage, and we can get those kinds of wins. That's huge. I helped overturn the death penalty in 3 states with bipartisan support for similar reasons. When you look at the cost and the amount of innocence and all of the repercussions of that system, once you make people aware of it, most people on the left or right agree, like there's problems here. And that's true with a lot of criminal justice issues. I think that's true with a lot of these regulatory anti-capitalist initiatives. I think it's true with things like school choice. There's so many areas where people in this country can come together. Corporate welfare. I mean, people on both sides can't stand the corporate welfare and the cronyism that goes on. So I think it's incumbent on people who are in the political sector to stay focused on those issues and to try to actually do outreach and build bridges with people and help ensure that the public is just aware of what's being done to them, what's happening to them, because people are busy and the mainstream media has not been doing its job for many, many years in trying to keep Americans up to speed on the realities. They often are, if you look at places like the Washington Post and the New York Times, they're literally just state puppets. They just repeat whatever government experts tell them to say. Yes. And it's been a real breakdown, I think, in our democracy. But I feel really encouraged with the age of information and the growth of social media and independent journalism and online platforms and productions like this show, that people can really access information in a way that they haven't before. And I think it's going to be a game changer.
No, I agree. And I remain optimistic because of, again, there are venues like Based Politics. There are these Substacks of folks pushing back and just being very simple and telling the truth. Again, if you have the truth, if you have the facts, you don't need to spin. You don't need to tell half-truths or spin narratives. You can just speak plainly. And I think if we did more of that, we can't talk about it now because we're going to wind down, but I want to have you back on because I read a piece recently at Based Politics about this technology being put into automobiles to switch them off, collect data, and I posted it at Real Clear Policy, and then I talked about it. I have a radio show. I talked about it on the radio show. I had callers call in and say that's not true. It's nonsense. To your point, Jerry, that's no way. I'm like, yeah, way. Go check out Based Politics. Anyway, so. You're doing great work.
Thank you.
I'm so happy that you joined us here, Hannah Cox.
Likewise.
This is wonderful. I do want to have you back on and talk about the that automobile issue. We'll tease that maybe for next time.
Yeah, I'd love to.
But thank you so much. Before I let you go, though, is there anything I should have asked that I didn't ask?
I don't think so. I mean, if you're on the ground in Alaska, now is the time to raise your voice and make sure that, they know that you don't want to see this. Again, this has Republicans and Democrats on it. So it is a problem. And if it's not your state, there's a good chance it is coming to a state near you. So you need to keep your eye on your legislatures. We have a really good belief that this is going to trickle across multiple states over the next couple of months. So keep your eye out. If you want more on Based Politics, you can go to our website, base-politics.com. But we mostly focus on new media. So you can look up my YouTube, our podcast, TikTok. That's where we really like to get the bulk of our information across. And most of my handles are at Hannah D. Cox. So we'd love to connect with people there. And I'd love to come back and talk about that kill switch issue. Thomas Massey has done a great job raising the alarm on that. But, I had to fact check the USA Today fact checkers who also tried to claim it wasn't happening.
Jerry, you're crazy. Yeah. This has been a joy. I appreciate it so much. So that's this episode of The Business of America.
Thanks, Jerry.
Hannah Cox, thank you.
This has been the Federal Newswire's Business of America podcast, hosted by Jerry Rogers. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.